Cars 3 is racing into theaters this weekend, but should you hit the brakes before buying a ticket? I'm Dan Merle, and I'll tell you right here on ScreenJunkies News.
You have no idea what a pleasure it is for me to finally beat you.
Oh, thanks. Wait, hang on, did you say meet or beat?
I think you heard me.
Hello and welcome to my review of Cars 3, the follow-up to the much maligned Cars 2 and the latest Pixar summer blockbuster to hit theaters. Now, one thing we know about Pixar is that they have a great record in the summer financially. Finding Dory was the biggest moneymaker of last summer, almost the biggest moneymaker of the year, except for some other Disney movies that finished above it. And money-wise, I don't think there's an argument that Pixar is crushing it. But I think there's also a bit of a perception that they're in a bit of a creative slump with movies like Finding Dory and The Good Dinosaur. Now, these aren't necessarily bad movies, but since 2015's Inside Out, we haven't really seen anything from Pixar that approaches that level creatively. And that's kind of where I find myself with Cars 3. Cars 3 isn't a bad movie, but the thing that we're learning about Pixar now and the way that they operate in the modern day is that they can operate on two levels. There's one that's a little bit up here where you find your Inside Outs, your Wall-E's, your Toy Story 3s. What's emerged in the last few years, though, is a second level that's a little bit lower. These are movies that aren't bad, they just don't quite transcend beyond what you would expect from an average kids movie. Now, to start with, I'll give this movie a lot of credit in that I think that Pixar heard a lot of the complaints about Cars 2, which was not at all in line with the first Cars movie. It was pretty much just a movie about Tow Mater and Finn McMissile, this whole spy ring business. It completely ignored most of what people liked about the first movie. It didn't really have anything to do with it. I honestly think you could completely skip Cars 2 and go from Cars to Cars 3 with no problem whatsoever, because this movie doesn't really circle back to anything about the storyline that people didn't like in Cars 2. This is pretty much a continuation of the first Cars movie. So I think Pixar should get a lot of credit for listening to the criticism of the fans and critics and bringing you a Cars movie that the fans are really going to enjoy. Cars 2 was certified rotten on the tomato meter. It wasn't an audience favorite either, and I think they wanted to return to form. With Cars 3, Pixar is saying, all right, let's go back to what we know the fans of this franchise like. And I think if you are a fan of this franchise, if you are a fan of the Cars movies, then you'll probably enjoy this film because it circles back to a lot of the characters that the fans love beyond just Lightning McQueen and Larry the Cable Guy's Tow Mater, if that's a character that you enjoy. Another thing that I liked was the character of Cruz Ramirez. And in a lot of ways, this feels like they're setting her up to be the future of the franchise if there is going to be a Cars 4. And let's face it, there probably is going to be one. I think it's a smart move from Pixar to say, hey, let's bring in some new characters, maybe rotate in some fresh blood, but do it in a way that's way more organic than Cars 2, where you're not just jamming a whole bunch of new characters in at the expense of the ones that you love. Again, I think that Pixar is learning. They're going to bring in new characters that will work in this universe in a way that they know their fans will enjoy. Now, there are a lot of things that didn't work for me in this movie as well. Keep in mind that Pixar over the years has kind of spoiled us. And I think as a result, there is an expectation from a lot of people surrounding every movie that they release to kind of hit the high highs that we've seen with the Toy Story 3s, with the Inside Outs, with the Ups and the Wall-E's of the world. They can't always operate on this level, and I think it's kind of unfair to expect Pixar to deliver a masterpiece every time. But I think that you can expect them to operate a little bit higher than this quote-unquote for kids level that this movie kind of lands on. This is a level where kids love these movies, but adults maybe don't have as much. I think when people go into a Pixar movie, they're expecting a movie that kids love, but adults can also enjoy on their own right. And that's what's missing here with me for Cars 3. I think it falls into a trap that a lot of kids movies do, where they put a bunch of loud noises and bright action sequences on the screen and expect that to be entertaining. And the middle part of this movie is a little bloated and packed with that kind of thing. If I'm being honest, I glazed over for about half an hour in the middle of the movie because it seemed like everything just kind of stopped and you had these big action sequences, but it just felt like noise. The plot wasn't really moving forward. Now, these are moments that kids will probably enjoy, but I think the adults in the audience might be checking their watches a little bit, saying like, okay, can we move things along? Let's get to the end here. And that's the kind of thing I think people expect from Pixar, is that focus on the narrative to tell a really streamlined story from beginning to end. Cars 3 feels a little bloated. I think a little bit could have come out of the middle of this movie and it would not have impacted the overall story. Not every movie has to be Inside Out, but it's that expert masterclass in storytelling that I think a lot of people love about Pixar. Now, if you're expecting a Disney film to be made just to entertain kids, especially really small children, I think you'd assume, okay, this is going to be a 90-minute movie. It's going to have a few action sequences, a lot of high energy. The kids come in, they watch it, and they leave. I think if you're going into a movie like Inside Out, if you're expecting a deeper level kind of film, this is going to be an experience that's closer to 2 hours, might not have as much action and noise, but the payoff for what you see is going to operate on a much deeper level. I think Cars 3 kind of tries to split the difference. I think it does both, but it's not necessarily to the movie's credit. It has those sequences that our kids are going to like, with the car racing, with the demolition derbies, with everything else that adults probably aren't going to enjoy as much. It's kind of diminishing returns. But having said that, there are long stretches of this movie where there's not a lot to keep particularly really young kids entertained. But those parts also really aren't up to the level where the adults are going to be heavily invested into the story of the movie. So I think kids are going to kind of be losing their patience at the slower parts of the movie. And I don't really think that they're weaving together enough of a narrative for adults to be especially entertained. It's where you kind of fall into that no man's land. Taking away the comparison to other Pixar movies, if I'm comparing Cars 3 to other kids movies that have come out this summer, it's definitely above something like the Diary of a Wimpy Kid sequel that came out a few weeks ago that was basically chock full of pee-pee poo-poo humor that nobody over 6 would really appreciate. But I would actually put Cars 3 below an animated film that came out a couple weeks ago, which was the Captain Underpants movie. Now, I'm not saying that Captain Underpants was a great movie or that it was up to the level of a Pixar movie. But as an adult, there were a dozen times or so in that movie that I said, oh wow, that's a funny joke. It's a movie that kept me entertained. It wasn't pandering to adults. It wasn't pandering to kids. It was just kind of cleverly written and executed. Again, not saying that Captain Underpants is up to the level of the best animated movies, but it's an example of a kids movie that I did see this summer that I thought were throwing some things out that were enjoyable to all audiences. It was about 90 minutes long and had some jokes and stuff that kids could like and adults could like. And this is what I don't think Cars 3 has. On my personal scale, I found that I enjoyed this film a little bit less than Finding Dory. That's a movie that I liked but didn't love. For adults that maybe aren't fans of the Cars franchise but are Pixar fans, particularly of their more popular movies, other than the animation and some of the cute characters, I don't know if there's a lot to connect to here. Kids older than 5 will probably enjoy it, but I think for younger kids, it might test their patience just a little bit. So bottom line on Cars 3, if you have kids that like the Cars movies, if you yourself are a fan, if you watch them growing up and have some nostalgic or sentimental connection to these characters, I think you'll enjoy this film. However, I would not recommend this for a general audience or an audience that only goes to Pixar movies looking for that deeper level, something on the level of a Toy Story 3 or an Inside Out. Not to say that it's a bad movie, but I don't think with all the expense that comes from bringing the kids to the theater or for taking yourself rushing out to the theater with the parking and the popcorn, the movie tickets, I don't think this is a movie you have to see in the theater unless you have a strong attachment to this franchise. This is something that you can wait for the video. And if you have kids that are home that want to watch an animated film, maybe pop on their favorite Pixar movie that you have on Blu-ray, DVD on demand, and wait for this one to come out on home media. Thanks for watching Screen Junkies News. You can click, select, tap, whatever you want. The box is on screen to watch even more Screen Junkies News, and don't forget to click the logo to subscribe.